On my 18th birthday, my parents said, "You were always the disappointment." They laughed as they burned my childhood journals. My aunt whispered, "Don't take it personally, sweetie. You're just less." 6 months later, I sent them a check that made them cry. "You know," my mother said, tossing one of my worn-out, sticker-covered notebooks into the fireplace, "you've always been a disappointment." She wasn't even angry. She sounded amused, like she was reciting a line from an old family joke. I stood frozen just inside the living room doorway, backpack still slung over one shoulder, trying to understand what I was looking at. The fire popped, hissed, my words curled into ash. My father didn't say much, just chuckled in his usual gruff way as he fed another journal into the flames. The pink one, I recognized it instantly. I'd written my first poem in that one, about a dog I'd never had. It was stupid, maybe, but it had meant something to me. My Aunt Myra, perched like a smug cat on the armrest, leaned toward me and whispered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't take it personally, sweetie. You're just less." Less. That word stayed with me for weeks. I don't really remember walking upstairs after that. I just remember packing the basics, a few clothes, my laptop, the flash drive I kept with all my code and designs. I didn't cry, not yet. I left through the back door. No one tried to stop me. Growing up in Roseburg, Oregon, my world was always small. My parents weren't outright cruel when I was little, just cold. Indifferent. I existed on the periphery of their lives, a thing to manage, not nurture. My mother, Celeste, was the sort of woman who believed any issue could be fixed by toughening up. My father, Martin, worked long days at his hardware store, rarely speaking unless to criticize. I wasn't what they wanted. Aunt Myra made sure I knew it. She lived nearby after her divorce and practically moved into our house. Her daughter Piper, my cousin, was her shining light. Popular, poised, perfect. Piper was the girl who got standing ovations at school plays and wore matching sets from Nordstrom while I scribbled in journals in the hallway corner. I wasn't jealous, just invisible. After I left, I texted the only person I thought might help, Jada. She and I had worked on a school robotics project together, the only place I ever felt seen. She picked me up that night without asking questions. I slept in her car for 3 nights. She worked closing shifts at a local diner and gave me leftovers, letting me crash behind the booths until sunrise. I spent my mornings cleaning grease traps, scrubbing the kitchen floors, and trying not to think about everything I'd left behind. On the 4th morning, she found me curled up in a milk crate behind the freezer and said, "You need a grown-up, not me." She was right. I called the one person I hadn't spoken to in years, my grandfather. Ellis lives in Coos Bay. He hadn't spoken to my mom since I was around 10. Something about a family fight, I was never told the full story. I remember once asking about him and my mom snapped. He made his choices. We make ours. But when I called, he answered after 2 rings. He didn't ask what happened, just said, "You get on a bus, I'll be waiting." That was the beginning of the real story. Not the dramatic birthday fire, not the whispered insults. Those were just the breaking point. The real change started when I stepped off that Greyhound in a town that smelled like salt and pine and felt more like home in a single day than Roseburg had in 18 years. Ellis was different, blunt, old school. The kind of guy who wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation and drank instant coffee like it was a religion. But he didn't pity me, he didn't coddle me. He handed me a broom, cleared a spot for me in his office, and said, "You want to stay here, you pull your weight." I did. We fell into a rhythm. I helped him fix up his garage, cleaned up the garden, cooked dinner while he taught me the basics of money, budgeting, credit, interest. Then came the computer stuff. "Show me what you know," he said one night, pointing to the ancient desktop in the corner. I showed him a site I had built for a school project. A clunky blog template with a simple comment section. He didn't say much, just nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll make you useful." He introduced me to online freelance boards. The work was inconsistent, but I learned quickly. I fixed broken websites, set up simple landing pages, even wrote some back-end scripts. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to matter. 2 months in, I was working late into the night with caffeine and YouTube tutorials, taking calls with clients in different time zones. By October, I'd made more money than my parents had ever spent on me willingly. Then came the Seattle contract. A startup needed a junior developer, 3 months, fully remote. The pay, $45,000. It was more than I'd ever dreamed. I said yes without thinking. Ellis bought me a second-hand ergonomic chair and said, "If you're gonna sit for 10 hours a day, don't ruin your back doing it." I worked myself sick. I drank coffee until 3 a.m., learned database design, fixed security issues, and learned how to stand up for myself in meetings with men twice my age. And then, one afternoon in December, I logged into my old email. A message from my mother. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. I stared at it for a while, then closed my laptop. 2 days later, I did something I'd been planning since the day I left. I added up every single dollar my parents ever threw in my face. They loved to tell people how expensive I was, how much they sacrificed. It became a joke among family friends. Oh, Celeste's got her little charity case. I remembered it all. $80 a month for piano lessons I didn't want. $1,100 for braces I begged them not to get me. $15 here, $25 there, birthday presents that came with guilt trips. A grand total of $12,486, give or take. I made out the check. Pay to the order of Martin and Celeste amount, $12,486.00 memo. Refund for raising your greatest disappointment. I mailed it in a plain envelope. No letter, no return address. 3 days later, the voicemail started. Celeste first, then Myra. Piper even reached out. Suddenly, I was confused, ungrateful, being manipulated. They talked like the past didn't exist, like I had walked out of a loving home on a whim. I didn't reply, but I listened to one voicemail from Myra. Her voice cracked halfway through. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Rowan. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. She's heartbroken." Good. Ellis and I sat on the back porch one night not long after. He sipped his black coffee and didn't say much, as usual. "You think I was too cruel?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Nah, cruel would have been sending it in cash." We both laughed, but in truth, it wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. I had spent 18 years wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough, why every smile I gave was returned with a sigh, why every look what I made was met with "Piper would have done better." I was never going to get an apology. That check was the last thing I ever sent them. They cashed it. I saw the withdrawal go through on my bank app. They took the money. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't hear from Piper until about a week after the check cleared. Her name popped up on my screen late at night, a string of messages that started with, "Hey, I know things have been weird, but I just wanted to talk." Then, "You should come home for Christmas. Mom said she'd really like that." I stared at the messages longer than I care to admit. Christmas. Home. What a joke. When I was 13, I made Piper a handmade leather bookmark for Christmas because I'd overheard her saying she wanted one like she saw on Etsy. I worked on it for 2 weeks using a craft kit from the thrift store. She opened it, laughed, and said, "Thanks, Rowan. Did you make this in prison?" Myra laughed so hard she choked on her wine. That was the same year my gift from my parents was a second-hand winter coat. It still had someone else's initials written in the collar. I didn't reply to Piper. She kept trying, though. More messages. Pictures of her dog. A meme about coding, as if she knew anything about what I was doing now. A selfie of her standing by the fireplace at my parents' house, the same one they'd used to burn my journals. I blocked her number. I'd spent most of my life being the one who was supposed to forgive, the one expected to keep trying. But for once, I wasn't going to hand out grace to people who saw my pain as entertainment. My work ramped up in the new year. The Seattle company offered me an extended contract. I negotiated more pay. I even bought a second monitor and treated myself to a new mattress. Ellis watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He wasn't the sort to say, "I'm proud of you," directly. But he'd leave a fresh cup of coffee by my keyboard in the mornings or tape up articles about tech booms to the fridge like some kind of dad bulletin board. One morning, he walked in while I was fixing a database issue for a panicked client and said, "Have you ever thought about starting your own business?" The question hit me like a rock to the chest. Not because I hadn't thought about it, I had, endlessly, but because no adult in my life had ever suggested I could lead anything. I was always the background noise to someone else's spotlight. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I have," he grunted in approval. "Then you should." We spent the next few weeks drawing up plans, or more like, me sketching ideas on napkins and Google Docs, and and Ellis providing old-school wisdom about contracts, taxes, and discipline. He didn't understand a line of code, but he understood the value. I built my own small web development agency. Nothing fancy, just me, a couple of freelancers I met online, and a growing list of clients who liked fast work and clear communication. I named it Sea Glass Dev. Quiet, practical, unpretentious. In March, I got a contract with a mid-sized clothing company in Portland. The pay made the Seattle job look like a side hustle. I started thinking about moving out, maybe getting my own apartment somewhere between Eugene and the coast. Still close to Ellis, but with my own space. And then, one Thursday morning, the phone rang. I was debugging a CSS issue and almost didn't answer, but I saw the area code. Roseburg, voicemail, then a second call, then a third. Finally, I picked up. It wasn't my mother, it wasn't Myra, it was Piper, again. "Rowan," she said, breathless like she'd just run up a flight of stairs. "Mom's in the hospital." My heart stuttered just for a second. Then, silence. "I don't know if you care," she went on quickly, like she didn't want to give me time to think, "but it's her heart. The doctors say it's serious." She paused. "She keeps asking for you." I felt nothing. Not anger, don't worry, not fear. Just blank. "I thought you should know," Piper added. Her voice had changed. No sharpness, no condescension, just tiredness. "In case you wanted to come." I thanked her quietly, then hung up. That night I sat outside with Ellis, watching the ocean roll under a cloudy sky. He didn't say anything. He just lit his pipe and waited. Eventually, I said, "My mom's in the hospital." He didn't look surprised. "Are you going?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Good," he said. "You don't owe ghosts your peace." 2 days later, I got a letter, not an email, a letter, handwritten. It was from Celeste. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered. Slanted, precise. It didn't start with "Dear Rowan." No apology, no excuses, just this. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to try. I've made mistakes. I thought being hard on you would toughen you. I thought I was protecting you from a world that doesn't care. I didn't realize I was becoming that world." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't beg. She just ended the letter with, "I'm sorry. For everything." I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. It didn't change the past, but it softened the edge. Ellis and I kept working. Spring turned to summer. I got an apartment in Florence, 1 bedroom, tiny balcony, and a view of the water if you leaned real far out. I didn't tell anyone the address. I painted one wall seafoam green. I bought a couch that didn't sag. On the day I moved in, Ellis handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check, $5,000. "I had it stashed away for when your mom finally came around," he said. "Looks like you beat her to it." I tried to give it back. He refused. "Put it toward your next chapter," he said. "You earned every cent." Weeks passed. One quiet morning, while debugging a payment system for a small art store in Montana, I got an email from Piper. Subject: Grandma's house inside was one line. "They're selling it. Thought you should know. There's stuff of yours in the attic." I stared at the screen. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the night they burned my journals. The idea of going back felt like opening a wound, but something about that attic tugged at me. My grandmother, before she passed, had always been the one person who made me feel like I mattered. She kept little things, drawings I made, stories I wrote, things my mother had tossed or ignored. Maybe there was something of hers still there. Maybe there was something about me. I hadn't decided whether I'd go, but I didn't delete the message either. I thought about the attic for 3 days before I made up my mind. It wasn't a curiosity. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something deeper, unfinished business. Not with my parents, not even with Piper. With the version of myself I'd left behind the night they threw my journals into the fire. So on a warm Saturday morning in August, I packed a backpack, drove the 2 hours back to Roseburg, and parked a block away from my childhood home. It hadn't changed. The garden was still overgrown, the shutters faded and crooked. A "for sale" sign stood tilted in the front yard. The place looked as weary as I remembered. I rang the doorbell once, then let myself in with the spare key still taped under the porch rail. No one was home. It was strange walking through those rooms that had once felt like prisons. The air was musty. Dust settled like snow on the picture frames. The house felt hollow, like it had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. I didn't linger. I went straight to the attic. The stairs creaked beneath my weight. It smelled of cedar, mold, and mothballs. Old holiday boxes were stacked along the wall, labeled in Myra's elegant handwriting. Tinsel and porcelain Santas, nothing of mine. Then in the far corner behind an overturned trunk, I saw it, a beat-up storage bin. Blue lid. Cracked on one side. My name was written in faded Sharpie on top. Inside were a few drawings I barely remembered making, crayon scribbles of sea creatures and castles. A small plush turtle I'd lost when I was 9. A stack of laminated bookmarks. And underneath it all a folder, manila, worn. I opened it carefully. Inside were printouts of some of the stories I'd written in middle school, fan fiction, short stories, a poem about time travel. On top of the pile was a note, yellowed and delicate. It read, "You are something special, Rowan. Someday they'll all know it. Love, Grandma." I held that note for a long time. Then I put everything back in the folder, zipped the bag shut, and walked downstairs with something quiet and powerful blooming in my chest. Back in Coos Bay, I told Ellis I'd gone back. He didn't say much, just nodded and handed me a beer. 2 weeks later, the house was sold. And then something strange happened. Celeste emailed me. Not Myra, not Piper, my mother. "We're moving to Arizona. I wanted you to know. The house is gone. I hope you're well. No attempt to reopen wounds. No, please call." Just a quiet update like a person reporting the weather. I archived the email. But something else had been turning over in my mind since the visit. A bigger plan. Here's the thing, success is a kind of revenge, but visibility, that's something else. So I started writing. Not code this time, stories. About growing up in a cold house. About being less. About being laughed at for daring to feel. I never used real names, but I didn't need to. The blog gained traction, especially after I published a piece titled, "The Year My Parents Burned My Childhood." It blew up. It got shared on Twitter, picked up by a few mental health influencers. Then a podcast invited me on to talk about it. I said yes. I sat in a sound booth in my Florence apartment with headphones on, and for the first time, I told the full story not for pity, but to show people what survival can look like. What rebuilding yourself from ashes really means. My DMs exploded. People sent emails, messages. They weren't angry. They were grateful. They shared their own stories, their own quiet burns. One morning, months later, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. From Piper. "I read your blog. I think you should know Mom read it too." She cried. A lot. Then another line. "I don't think she expected you to land on your feet." I didn't respond. But at that moment, I realized the check wasn't the final move. That story was. The one they couldn't erase, couldn't laugh off, couldn't burn. It lives online now. Shared and seen and understood by thousands. Every word I wrote was another journal they could never touch again. Today, I run my own development company. I take on the projects I care about. I work with small businesses, artists, and nonprofits. I mentor girls from small towns who think they'll never escape. My office has a cork board above my desk. On it, I've pinned a few things. The check receipt, the note from Grandma, a printout of the blog post with the header, over 1 million views, and the photo of me, standing on the porch of my apartment, holding the keys, smiling like someone who's finally found the door that was always meant to be hers. No one had to die, no one had to suffer, but they had to watch me become something they never thought I could be. That was the best revenge of all, not screaming, not slamming doors, just thriving, loudly, and never looking back.